said it in an interview with a country's top newspaper, she is reluctant to recommend surgical and chemical sex change services for minors who identify as transgender. It's important to accept the child as they are, she said, but it's also necessary to recognize that it's common for children to strongly identify with the opposite sex at some point in their lives. But 4 out of 5 children who identify as trans will grow out of it during puberty. That's why it's wise to monitor the situation, give the child peace of mind, and treat the family's anxiety and possible related problems. Finland is right now considering a gender self-ID law for adults, and a activist group there is pushing to have the law apply to minors as well. Of course they are. She argues, does the doctor, that the age limit should not be lowered when it comes to making these sorts of decisions about that will affect the rest of your life when you're a kid, right. Deferring to kids the way, like we're all Charlize Theron. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, 4 and 5, that's still leaves 20%, which by my way of thinking, that's about where things are tracking because of the social contagion aspect of this, but that is way over the top in terms of people that are really struggling with gender dysphoria in a way that requires psychiatric treatment, as opposed to going through a phase, as the doctor's describing, with the other 80% of the kids. But nonetheless. So you got to get to the kids early, I guess, is the point.
Right. I mean, can you imagine when we were kids? Because I was a tomboy. Did not want to wear dresses, just as a boy. Wanted to change my name. And I should have been a boy, Mom. And I remember just saying, shouldn't I have been a boy? Because I like playing sports. And thank God they didn't, cater to me on that feeling.
Well, nobody was even
out of it.
Was even conceivable when we were kids. Nobody would conceive of this at that time.
Craziness.
Or certainly it was, unbelievably rare. And now it's a religion, and that's what it is, which is why outcomes are not of particular interest to so many who are pushing this, because they're members of this trans church. And by the way, those members are becoming actual priests and pastors. Have you seen Penny Cost? See what he did there? Pentecost, Pentecost. Methodist pastor.
Of course he's Methodist.
This dude who dresses up like a woman and offers sermons for the Methodists. I'm sure he would be comfortable at your church too, Amy. Nuthouse. Here's what he had to say at a recent homily, just to give you a sense of what's going on. And so what will go on within the Methodist Church, and of course there was a very high publicized schism over things like this, but who's winning the day?
No longer may we sit idly by in wooden pews of fallen trees from lands that were stolen. No longer may we listen unshaken to the words of those dispersed seeking refuge from church-appointed supremacy and pseudo-sanctified nationalism. No longer may we allow the tears of our ancestors to be that of a well of sorrow. Today, we turn them into a raging river of defiant joy and resilient action. For in Scripture of today it is said, "Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture." Reading modernity into this scripture, we see what can be described as a gentrification, not just of economic measures, not just of displacement of bodies, but a gentrification of grace itself. The privileged elite have enacted the social reality of generations of oppression and injustice, redlining and wealth capping, all leading to the destabilization and displacement from the one place that the oppressed sought refuge, their home and the houses of God.
No, it's one thing when you hear that same pablum from an NYU undergrad. It's another thing when you hear it from the pastor of a Methodist church.
I mean, but they're drag queened out. I mean, it looks like Tootsie on crack. Like,
Yeah.
all bling bling. I mean, they're as if they're going to,
They're
a formal.
He.
He.
Yeah, that's right. Well, speaking of
That's not-
churches, there's a law pending in Idaho that would prevent doctors and therapists from permanently damaging children by making it a felony to offer sex change surgery or puberty blockers to minors, punishable by jail time. And that's being opposed by the Boise chapter of the Satanic Temple because, as they argue, gender affirmation rituals carried out with a satanic minister serve as both celebration of the self and a declaration to the self and others of one's true identity, and are purposed to dispel any shame and stigma surrounding one's gender identity due to religious discrimination or cultural ignorance. Well, there you go. The Methodists and the Satanists are aligned and largely indistinguishable these days. For more on this, pleased to be joined by our friend David Marcus, who's a columnist living in West Virginia. Couldn't hack it anymore in New York. And the author of Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. David, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Can I just say that when Amy said, of course he's a Methodist, that's the most Midwestern thing I've ever heard in my life.
Sorry. Well, you know.
Of course he's
United
a Methodist.
Methodist or Methodist?
Yeah. You know those Methodists. So are you running against Manchin? Why'd you move to West Virginia?
Yeah, what happened?
I'm not running against Manchin. I know a couple people who might be. No, this was mostly about my kid. I have a 12-year-old son who's about to be a teenager, and the plan was to live in New York, but his mom and I kind of talked about it, and it's a tough time to be a teenager in New York right now. I mean, when he was born, the idea of a couple of 15-year-olds taking the train into Manhattan to see a movie and coming back 10, 11 o'clock at night would have been no big deal. That's just not true anymore. It's dangerous. They don't work well. And so we just wanted to change. And, so here I am out in the sticks. I am looking at a beautiful sunset or sunrise over the mountains. So no
Makes
complaints.
sense. Yeah. You maybe you could take a coding class with all those out-of-work coal miners.
That's right.
Yeah.
We got a lot of in-work coal miners here in West Virginia. It turns out, so it's keeping my energy bill relatively low. So knock on wood for that.
Very
Does your
good.
son like it there? Is he acclimated?
Yeah, he does. He especially likes the new school. It's they have something akin to school choice, or at least sort of like charters that you can sort of pick from. And his school in Brooklyn, I mean, everything's just so woke. I mean, every day was Pride Day or BLM Day or whatever it was. And look, I'm fine with all of that, but a seventh grader doesn't need that every day.
Yeah.
When he was 11, he was being asked what his gender identity was. It's
Right.
Well,
but I mean, I'm just telling you, and pass this on. Don't watch The Hills Have Eyes. All right,
okay.
You just don't want to see that movie now that you're a West Virginian. But speaking of your son's experience in Brooklyn at school, you wrote recently about the failure to protect children, and it's certainly there's a lot to that heading. But one of the areas is with this, what I describe as religious zealotry of the trans movement, the LGBTQ, but really the trans movement when you're talking about major surgeries, including in the schools.
Yeah, just listening to you guys talk about it now, I think one of the really important things that I've realized and that I think people should think about is that the focus on children is intentional. And the idea here really has nothing to do with the kids. The idea here is about affirming the delusions of adults.
Right.
Because the reason that the trans movement has tied itself so directly to the gay, lesbian, and bisexual movement is the idea that that's how people are born, right? And rightfully we say, okay, if somebody is born a certain way, that you have to treat that differently because it's not something they chose, it's something that they are. The trans advocates really want this to be something that you're born as, that's completely irrevocable. In order for that to be true, there have to be trans kids. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In order for an adult to say this is always who I am, there's no question about this, then that has to be true when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old as well. So that's what's really going on here, and it's pretty awful.
Well, I mean, we had the Surgeon General say, all last week that 13-year-olds, it's too young for kids to be on social media, but yet they could have sex change operations.
Right, and why did why did the Surgeon General say that? He was specific. He said, and I believe this is a direct quote, they shouldn't be on social media because their identity is still developing. What?
Wow.
Right.
But that doesn't
Right.
pertain to, yeah.
Right.
So you can't go on Tumblr because your identity is still, developing. But by all means, if you want to take puberty blockers because you're just certain at 12 or 13 that you're a boy or you're a girl or you're non-binary or what, use moon pronouns or whatever it is, that identity apparently is set. It doesn't make any sense, and I think that's what we just have to keep saying out loud, almost to the point of not engaging when it becomes nonsensical, because you get sucked into these debates and you lose sight of the fact that what you're really talking about is obviously a 12-year-old can't decide what their gender is.
Right, but also too. I mean, I hear what you're saying and about the fundamental point here, and the logic that follows from the adults having to affirm their self, as the Satanic Temple interestingly points out. But there is a effort to sexualize. It seems to me. I mean, the parading around. If you want to dress up like a woman, your man wants to dress like a woman. I don't care. But parading around, scantily clad, all of that stuff. The what we saw at Francis Parker High School. You bring in a trans activist to explain to 16-year-olds what dildos are, and this. There is also that sexualization piece, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, there absolutely is, and it's almost demeaning at times to women. I mean, this new celebrity, Dylan Mulvaney, who was at the red carpet at the Oscars, right?
Right.
A lot of conservative women have written articles based. I think it was Amber Ackey who, basically accused her of doing a kind of blackface, but woman face. Because it is all this, like, it's hyper-sexualized, right? It's hyper-giggly, and, let's talk about our makeup, and, women are rightfully offended by this. That's not what being a girl or being a woman is. And it's like, in order to, affirm Dylan Mulvaney and make sure that person stays safe, we have to go back 60 years and really demean women. None of this makes any sense.
Well, that's actually where the term TERF comes from, right? These second wave and third wave feminists who are on this issue aligned with a lot of conservatives, the trans exclusionary radical feminist, the rap that they're called by the trans movement. But I mean, you've got some of those feminist movement leaders who are basically saying the same thing if they have the courage of J.K. Rowling to do so, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the idea, the idea that this is not how a woman is defined, and sort of, from the beginning of when this issue really took hold, which is about 6-7 years ago, Chicago was actually the sort of ground zero in a sense. I don't know if you remember. I believe it was either 13 or 14. Kevin Williamson, who writes for National Review, wrote a piece in the Chicago Tribune that said Laverne Cox is not a woman. It should not have been a terribly controversial notion. They retracted the piece.
Right.
You weren't allowed to say it in the newspaper. And I think it's taken us too long to now realize that should have been a much bigger warning flag. But, boy, we're here now, right? Because this runs into public policy. Is your 13-year-old girl going to be doing a track meet against the boys? What are we going to do about prisons? What are we going to do about shelters? There's real questions here.
He is David Marcus. He's a columnist now living in West Virginia and the author of the book Charade, The COVID Lies That Crushed a Nation. David, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560.